The war in Sudan has been ongoing for over 2 years and is one of the deadliest and most destructive wars Sudan has seen.
We begin this hour in the African country of Sudan, where thousands of Americans are caught up in an escalating crisis.
Sudan is in crisis.
By most measures, it is the worst war happening anywhere in the world. Since fighting erupted between the army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces in April 2023, Sudan hasn't just plunged into the abyss, but already hit the bottom.
Sudan has been plagued by conflict since independence. But this was the first time a conflict has destroyed the very seat of power in Khartoum.
The days targeting Sudan's only functioning airport, an electricity station and oil terminals.
This war is between the Sudanese army, led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the paramilitary group called the Rapid Support Forces, led by General Mohamed Dagalo, also known as Hemedti. This war has killed over 150,000 people and forced more than 13 million to leave their homes. That's more than a quarter of Sudan's population. More than half of Sudan's population is in need of food, and famine has been experienced in many parts of the country. Both Hemedti and General Abdel Fattah have been accused of targeting civilians and committing war crimes. Humanitarian groups have declared the crisis in Sudan as one of the biggest humanitarian crises that has ever been recorded, and yet most countries seem to ignore this war and focus on other wars like Ukraine and Russia or Palestine and Israel. Today, let's briefly look at Sudan's history and how this war came to start. Sudan gained independence in the year 1956, and at that time, South Sudan and modern-day Sudan were one country called Sudan. This was the largest country in Africa and the 10th largest in the world. Sudan went ahead to elect their first leader, Ismail al-Azari, who went on to become the first prime minister of independent Sudan. In the year 1958, just 2 years after declaring independence, a retired military leader known as Abdallah Halil led a military coup that overthrew al-Azari's civilian government. 11 years later, in 1969, Jafar Naimeri took control of the government in a military coup, removing Prime Minister and President Ismail al-Azari. Naimeri declared himself Prime Minister and later became the President. He ruled Sudan for over 15 years, but then in 1985, he was overthrown in yet another military coup led by Field Marshal Abdel al-Dahab. This coup took place when Naimeri was visiting the United States. The army led by al-Dahab took over the government without any violence. Al-Dahab set up a military council, promised elections, and actually kept his promise by giving power to a civilian government in 1986, something that is very rare among military rulers. In 1986, Sadiq al-Mahdi became prime minister following democratic elections. Sadiq al-Mahdi led a coalition government, but struggled with internal divisions, economic problems, and an ongoing civil war in the south. In 1989, his government was overthrown by another military coup led by Omar al-Bashir. Bashir looked at the history of Sudan's leadership and noticed a pattern of coups, so he decided to rule differently. Omar al-Bashir ruled Sudan for 30 years and can be partly blamed for what is happening in Sudan today. When he came into power, he started by dissolving political parties, jailing opponents, and used security forces to crush protests. To keep himself in power, he formed alliances with the Islamist groups and adopted a strategy called coup-proofing. Coup-proofing in his case was to basically surround himself with protectors and keep them in check by not letting them know who is on top of who. It's actually like playing leaders of different security agencies to your own benefit. When one starts to act too ambitious or like a threat, you use the rest to eliminate him. The main protector of the Sudanese president is the SAF, Sudanese Armed Forces. They are the official national military of Sudan, and SAF is recognized by the Sudanese constitution as the country's primary defense force. SAF played a big role in Sudan's civil war that had been ongoing for decades between North and South Sudan. This long-running conflict had two major phases and was driven by deep ethnic, religious, political, and economic divisions. The South, that was mostly Christian Africans, felt that the North was taking advantage of them. The Arab-dominated North would mine gold and oil from the South and use it to improve the North. This conflict led to over 2 million deaths and over 4 million people were displaced. In 2011, South Sudan separated from Sudan in a peaceful referendum where 99% of South Sudanese voted for independence, leading to the official birth of South Sudan as a new nation on July 9, 2011. In 2010, while SAF was busy fighting in the south, two Sudanese non-Arab groups located in Darfur decided to rebel against the government. Darfur is located in the western part of Sudan, and they accused the central government in Khartoum of neglecting their region. al-Bashir was faced with the hard task of fighting two major groups at the same time. Instead of diverting the Sudanese army from the south where fighting was more serious, Omar al-Bashir decided to train and arm Arab herders in Darfur who would then fight the non-Arabs. These Arab fighters later came to be known as the Janjaweed and were led by this guy. I don't know if you can recognize him, but this is Mohamed Dagalo, aka Hemedti. The Janjaweed were very brutal and violent in their operation. This violence led to a massive humanitarian crisis with over 300,000 people killed and more than 2 million people displaced. When asked, the Sudanese government denied formal ties to the Janjaweed, but evidence showed coordination between the militia and the army, including air support during attacks. These atrocities led to international condemnation and the prosecution of President Omar al-Bashir by the ICC for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. At that time, he was still in power and had the protection of two armies, so no one dared to arrest him. The Janjaweed managed to defeat these rebels, and eventually the conflict came to an end. In 2013, the Janjaweed rebranded as the Rapid Support Forces (RSF). They were led by Hemedti and placed under government command. Bashir became very close to Hemedti, who he called Hamayati, which in Arabic means my protection, a clever wordplay that sounded similar to his name. Bashir gave RSF big roles and managed to turn them into a business empire. They have been linked to capturing and operating Sudan's gold mines, oil fields, providing mercenaries for hire, and smuggling weapons into neighboring countries like Chad and Libya. These operations made Bashir and Hemedti very rich and powerful, and the RSF managed to grow at a very high speed. The RSF are linked to gold trade, especially with Russia and UAE. This is also why some Kenyans were claiming that gold is being smuggled through Kenya to UAE. Just recently, a Kenyan plane was shot down by SAF in the Darfur region and a Kenyan pilot was killed. The Kenyan president even allowed RSF to form a government in KICC and has been accused of being a close ally of Hemedti. I also came across this article that shows that Kenya might be supporting RSF with weapons. So in 2011, South Sudan managed to get their independence and became the world's youngest nation. This was met with celebration and relief in the new formed nation. When the South broke away, they took away around 75% of oil fields and a percentage of gold mines. This meant that Bashir had to support his two large armies with fewer resources. By 2018, it is estimated that around 70% of Sudan's revenue was going to their security sector to pay their salaries and buy them equipment. This left very little funds for the Sudanese people. Little by little, inflation started rising and the cost of living became unbearable. The quality of life in Sudan went down, and by 2018, people started getting fed up. By 2019, people went to the streets and started protesting against al-Bashir's government. Al-Bashir refused to leave office and used RSF and SAF to crack down on protesters. The protests continued for months, and it became clear that people would not back down. Hemedti, together with RSF and al-Burhan with SAF, surprised the whole world by teaming up and overthrowing Bashir. They arrested and handed him over to the ICC, and then Burhan became leader of Sudan with Hemedti as his vice. They agreed to govern the country and eventually hand over leadership to a civilian leader elected by the people. But this is not an easy thing to do. The process of electing a civilian leader was delayed and kept facing challenges. Protesters went back to the streets, and eventually the US and other countries decided to pressure these two generals into electing a leader. In August 2019, a power-sharing deal was signed between the military and civilian protest leaders. This led to the creation of a transitional sovereignty council with both military and civilian members. Abdallah Hamdok was appointed to lead a civilian-led transition government. The transition was supposed to take 21 months and will end up in democratic elections.
Celebrations in the capital Khartoum as a political standoff de-escalates. In a gesture of peace, Sudan's ruling military freed more than 200 rebel fighters who are part of the country's opposition. A step towards reconciliation. One rebel leader praised their release.
It shows clearly that the army and the armed forces are our partners and not our enemy. With cooperation and understanding, we will meet the demands of the Sudanese people.
In October 2021, the military led by General Al-Burhan staged a coup, dissolved the transitional government, and placed Hamdok under house arrest. After international pressure, the military reinstated him in November 2021, but he resigned in January 2022, citing a lack of progress and continued military interference. Burhan became the leader again, and Hemedti his vice. The two generals faced a lot of international pressure, and in 2022, they again agreed to hand over power. In 2022, they signed the deal that was supposed to hand over power to a civilian-led transitional government by April 2023. However, tensions grew as they disagreed how and when to merge RSF into the regular army. Al-Burhan wanted RSF to be absorbed into the regular army, which would place Hemedti under him and make him way less powerful. Al-Burhan also wanted this to happen in 2 years, but Hemedti suggested 10 years. This disagreement caused a great rift between the two leaders, who somehow felt superior to each other. On April 2023, Hemedti sent around 2,000 of his fighters to Al-Burhan's home that is heavily guarded by the military. The instructions were to assassinate Al-Burhan, which will place Hemedti on top of everyone else in Sudan. Al-Burhan's men fought fiercely and managed to sneak him out of his house and save his life. In the process, more than 30 of them were killed. After this, the conflict spread and both armies went after each other in the capital Khartoum. Fighting intensified and quickly spread to other regions of Sudan. Major cities like Khartoum and Janjaweed have been turned into battlefields, with entire neighborhoods destroyed, hospitals bombed, and basic services collapsing. Many people have been cut off from food, clean water, electricity, and medical care for months. There has been widespread reports of war crimes and atrocities, especially in the Darfur region, like the Zamzam refugee camp that the RSF attacked in April of this year. It was hosting around 500,000 people, and in the process, around 400 civilians were killed.
In Sudan, the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, have taken control of the Zamzam refugee camp in the Darfur region. The UN says at least 400 civilians were killed. It's one of the largest camps for internally displaced people in Sudan. And local aid groups say the RSF targeted civilians on an ethnic basis, hunting down community leaders and their families.
The RSF and allied militants have been accused of ethnic killings, mass rape, looting, and burning villages, similar to the violence seen during the Darfur genocide in the early 2000s. Schools and hospitals have been attacked, aid workers have been killed, and humanitarian groups have struggled to reach those in need due to fighting. Millions are at risk of famine, and the country's economy has nearly collapsed. The war has also spread into neighboring countries, creating regional instability and a growing refugee crisis in places like Chad, Egypt, and South Sudan. Despite the destruction, peace talks have failed and both sides continue to fight for power with no clear end in sight. Both sides have been losing and gaining territory, and there doesn't appear to be a clear winner in this war. The UN has accused both sides of crimes against humanity, but no one has been prosecuted by the ICC yet. Despite being one of the world's worst humanitarian crises, the war in Sudan has received far less global attention, aid, and media coverage than other recent conflicts such as those in Ukraine or Gaza. This silence shows that the world does not treat all countries the same. When problems happen in African countries, they often get less help and attention. Because of this, millions of Sudanese people are suffering while most of the world looks away. Some countries like the UAE have been accused of supporting the RSF for their own financial gains. What began as a power struggle between two generals quickly exploded into a full-scale war, tearing through cities, homes, and lives. Streets once filled with hope now echo with gunfire, and the dream of a peaceful Sudan drifts further away with each passing day. This conflict has made Sudan's path to democracy even more difficult, burying the voices of the people beneath the rubble of war. The battle for power has drowned out the calls for freedom, but the spirit of the Sudanese people still waits in the shadows, hoping for a new dawn. Recall Media and a focus on geopolitics and issues happening around us. Kindly hit that subscribe button, and I will see you on the next one.